Detailed disassembly of CZ Shadow 2. From field disassembly, take the slide, insert your 1/16 inch punch, and gently tap out your extractor pivot pin. With your thumb over the extractor, remove the punch, and ease the extractor out of its channel. This allows you to remove the extractor return spring. Moving on to your firing pin, use a punch to compress the firing pin and expose the hammer stop. Place your finger over the firing pin to prevent it popping out, and remove the hammer stop, the firing pin, and the firing pin return spring. Your slide is completely disassembled. Disassembly of the magazine. Magazine has an external base plate and an internal base plate. Pull down on the rear of the internal base plate and slide the external base plate off. Decompress the spring slowly, remove, and tilt your thumb over the follower and it should pop out. That is the complete disassembly of the magazine. Disassembly of the frame. Remove the grip panels with your Torx 20 screwdriver. Decock the hammer and punch out crosspin, which retains your magazine brake. Here's the magazine brake. Using your thumb to provide pressure, pop out the crosspin, which retains your mainspring plug. Remove the plug, remove the mainspring. Cut the hammer, and by lifting the safety, it will elevate the long arm of the sear spring. Using a flathead screwdriver or your dental pick, you should be able to wedge beneath the long arm of the sear spring to lift it out of the safety channel. Placing your thumb over the sear housing and remove the sear housing from the frame. Lift the right hand ambi safety to the 12 o'clock position and simply pull it out, put it to one side. There are two safety detents, one on the right hand side, one on the left hand side. The right hand side safety detent is not under spring pressure, and the left hand side one is under spring pressure. Lifting the right hand detent out of its channel, you can then remove it. The left hand detent can be removed by placing your finger above the disconnector, holding it in place on the right hand side, and simply tilting against the detent tip. And removed. This then exposes the vertical peg, which retains the hammer axle crosspin. Once removed, we're now able to punch out the pin from the right-hand side of the frame to the left. and remove the hammer assembly. Note that the pin can only be inserted from the left-hand side of the frame to the right-hand side. The hammer assembly is made up of 3 components and 2 cross pins. The rear cross pin retains the hammer strut and allows it to pivot, and the fore cross pin retains the disconnector and allows it to pivot. Both of these pins are factory staked and shouldn't be punched out unless replacing any one of these 3 components. Next, we're going to remove the retaining spring for the slide stop. It is held in by this oddly shaped peg, which is flat on its right-hand side and cone-shaped on the left-hand side. And there's the spring. Note that when reinserting the peg will be inserted into this hole over here, cone side first, and the flat side will sit just beneath the surface. Not quite flush with the surface, but just beneath the surface. Next, we remove this flathead screw, which retains both the trigger bar tension spring as well as the magazine release spring. Tension spring, simply put your finger into the frame and ease it out from beneath the trigger bar. This then exposes our magazine release spring. Using a small screwdriver, tilt this out. And there it is over there. This then allows us to remove our magazine release. And that is your frame completely disassembled. Disassembly of the sear mechanism. The sear mechanism, or assembly, comprises 4 components. The sear pin, which is depressed from the left-hand side or the right-hand side. The sear and sear spring, as well as the assembly with its integrated ejector. That is the full disassembly of the CZ Shadow 2 pistol. Please note that there is a horizontal roll pin that has been factory staked, which retains the trigger return spring, and the trigger bar in position. Once this pin has been depressed and released from the frame, it cannot be reused. It needs to be replaced with a blank pin, which is then restaked upon reinserting these components. Only when requiring direct maintenance of these components, or replacement of these components, should this pin be removed and restaked with a new pin. Reassembling the sear assembly, sear pin, sear spring, sear housing with integrated ejector, and the sear. First, place the sear with this arm from beneath the sear housing on the left-hand side and align the sear pin until it protrudes through the center of the sear. Place the short arm upward and the long arm in this channel, and insert your punch from the right-hand side placing pressure over the sear spring then able to drive the pin home until it's flush, and that is your sear housing reassembled. Reassembly of the frame. Slide stop retaining spring. There's a small hole drilled into the frame over here. We guide the spring into the channel using the cone-shaped side of its retaining peg. Place this in right to left into the frame, and then we use a small screwdriver, flathead screwdriver, to push down the spring and allow the peg to float on top of it. I should hold it in place. Using our punch, should be able to give it a gentle tap until you hear a firm click to lock it in place. Here's the click. We install our magazine release and its return spring, which will be orientated with the eye of the spring facing down towards the front of the frame. This essentially is placed in this channel. Like so. Pressure placed from above on the spring while in the channel and while manipulating the magazine release allows you to reposition it inside, and our magazine release is reinstalled. Now, above the eye, we will place the eye of our trigger bar return spring in this orientation. Like so. These two are then held in place by a flathead screw. And screwed back into place with our flathead screwdriver. Should be tightened firmly, but not over taut. Install hammer strut and allow the disconnector to fall over the trigger bar. This allows us to orientate it and insert the hammer axle crosspin, note its profile, from the left-hand side of the frame to the right. Once in position, a vertical peg can be installed to retain the crosspin. And if you get the angle just right, it just pops into place. Next, we insert the left-hand side safety detent. Notice that this is two components. These vertical uprights should be orientated as such to the frame and under spring pressure towards the back of the frame. Parallel but below the slide rail on the left-hand side of the frame. And into its channel, so. The right-hand side detent is not under spring pressure, and it should be orientated on the right-hand side of the frame below the slide rail, parallel to the slide rail in this orientation. And it pops into its channel. So we then install our fully assembled sear housing by pushing it over the disconnector and rearward into the frame to this channel. Note that there is a great deal of hammer tension against this. We hold this in place with a finger. Pathway directly through the frame and the sear housing. Pushing the right-hand safety detent rearward, we're then able to reinstall our right-hand safety in the 12 o'clock position. Then tilt clockwise, place our safety into the frame, and it won't go very far until it is obstructed by the long arm of the sear spring. Then by simply lifting the long arm of the sear spring, we're then able to depress the safety until it reaches at this point here. We then cock the hammer and compress the safety while pulling back on the vertical uprights of the left-hand safety detent. This snaps into place against the detent pressure. However, to make sure the mechanism is locked, the long arm of the sear spring needs to be pushed back into its channel. Sometimes this will happen by itself. However, this is the main thing to check. With the safety cocked, we can see that the long arm of the spring rises slightly and is not flush against the base of its channel within the sear housing. With the safety decocked, we notice that it should be flush, and it should sit neatly inside the channel of the crossbar of the left-hand side safety. With the safety disengaged, decock the hammer, insert the mainspring, encapsulating the hammer strut. And then insert the mainspring cap or plug in this orientation. And as soon as it is compressed sufficiently, we insert its crosspin and ensure that it is flush on both sides of the frame. Then install the magazine brake. There is a notch in front of the plug in the frame for the thin end to be inserted into. And in this orientation, we then line up magazine brake with the frame and insert its crosspin. Ensure that that is flush. Once both pins are flush, we can reinstall the grip handles. And that is our frame reassembled. Reassembly of the slide. First, place your firing pin into its return spring and into the channel in the rear, placing the hammer stop orientated whereby this notch is on the left-hand side in relation to the rear side and rear of the slide, then placed over the top and simply snapped into place. Check for function. The extractor return spring into this angular channel, insert the extractor, and then place thumb and finger pressure over the extractor to manipulate it into position. We reinsert the vertical pivot pin from above and tap into place until it's flush with the slide. That is the full reassembly of the slide. Reassembly of the magazine housing, magazine spring and internal base plate. Match the profile of the follower to the magazine. Place in the top and hold in place. Match the profile of the spring and the internal base plate to the magazine. Place the spring into the follower and slide and compress the spring, placing your thumb over the top. Then guide the external magazine base plate from front to back and snap into place. Check for function. magazine reassembled.